You can still smell it if you close your eyes. Warm bread, simmering chili, that metal tray sliding along the rail. In 1965, lunch was cooked from scratch by women in hairnets who got there before sunrise to feed you like you were their own. Every meal on this list is gone now. Number 14 was frozen out of existence. Number 3 still haunts grown adults who cannot find the recipe. And number 1, you will remember it before I finish saying it. Hit subscribe. Let us count down. Number 25, fish sticks with tartar sauce. Every Friday, the smell hit the hallway before the bell even rang. Breaded rectangles of white fish, baked in long sheet pans until the coating turned crisp and golden, served with a dollop of tartar sauce made right there in the kitchen from mayonnaise, pickle relish, and a squeeze of lemon. In a country that was still heavily Catholic in 1963, Friday meant no meat, and the fish sticks solved the problem for every public school in the district at once. The fish itself often came free through government surplus programs, shipped frozen in cardboard boxes. A serving cost the school almost nothing. Children who would never touch fish at home ate these without a fight because the breading disguised everything about them. Served with a scoop of coleslaw and a roll, this was the meal that made Friday feel different. Today's version comes out of a bag, reheated and rubbery. The ones from 1965 were baked fresh and gone by noon. Number 24, Spanish rice. Long before schools thought about menu variety, the cafeteria had one reliable way to stretch a little ground beef across an entire lunch line. Long grain rice was simmered with canned tomatoes, chopped onion, green pepper, and just enough browned beef to give it flavor, then seasoned with paprika, salt, and a pinch of chili powder. The rice drank up the tomato and turned a deep, rusty orange. A single steam pan fed dozens of kids for pennies each. The lunch ladies made it in enormous batches, stirring it with wooden paddles the size of canoe oars. It was warm, faintly sweet, and filling in the way only a bowl of rice can be. Served with a slice of buttered bread and a carton of milk, it anchored 100 Tuesday lunches across the Midwest. It vanished when pre-portioned entrees took over, and nobody wanted to cook rice from scratch for 400 children anymore. Number 23, peanut butter and honey sandwiches. This was the meal that appeared when the hotline ran short or the budget ran thin, and no child ever complained. The peanut butter came in giant cans through the government commodity program, thick and dense and slightly oily on top. The lunch ladies stirred it smooth, spread it edge to edge on soft white bread, and drizzled honey across it before pressing the halves together. The honey soaked into the bread just enough to keep it from drying out by lunchtime. A single can of commodity peanut butter made dozens of sandwiches for almost nothing. For a kid, it was sweet, sticky, and satisfying. The kind of thing that clung to the roof of your mouth all through afternoon spelling. It disappeared from menus as peanut allergies rose and liability fears grew. What was once the cheapest, most reliable lunch in America is now banned outright in thousands of schools. Number 22, vegetable beef soup. When the kitchen needed to clear out whatever was left in the walk-in, it went into the soup pot, and nobody did it better than a 1960s cafeteria. A little stew meat, browned first, then canned tomatoes, diced carrots, celery, potatoes, corn, and green beans all simmered together in beef stock until the whole thing turned deep and savory and the windows of the lunchroom fogged over. A giant kettle of it cost the school almost nothing and fed the entire building. It was ladled, steaming into plastic bowls, and served with crackers packed in wax paper sleeves. Children crumbled the crackers on top and watched them go soft. This was the meal for the coldest days of January, the one that actually warmed a kid up before he went back out to a freezing playground. It vanished when scratch soup gave way to institutional cans, and the real thing became a memory nobody could quite reproduce. Number 21, Bologna sandwiches. Every cafeteria in America kept a supply of bologna, and in the 1960s it showed up two ways: cold on white bread with a smear of mustard for the sack line, or fried on the griddle for the hot line on a busy day. The lunch ladies cut small notches in the edges of each thick slice so it would not curl up and dome in the center, then laid it flat on the flat top until it blistered and browned around the rim. The smell filled the hallway. Served on soft white bread, sometimes with a slice of that orange government cheese melting underneath, fried bologna was a proper hot meal, not an afterthought. It cost the school almost nothing per serving. Kids ate it after gym class, ravenous and never thought twice. It disappeared when processed meat fell out of favor and nutrition guidelines tightened. A generation still remembers that griddle smell better than they remember their teachers. Number 20, franks and beans. This was the meal that could feed an entire school with 2 ingredients and a steam pan. Frankfurters, sliced into thick coins, were stirred into a vat of baked beans that had been sweetened with brown sugar and molasses and dotted with a little mustard. The beans simmered until they turned dark and syrupy, and the sliced franks soaked up the sweetness while adding a salty, smoky bite. A single serving cost the district a few cents. The lunch ladies would pull the pans from the oven with the tops caramelized and slightly crusted, and the smell was pure comfort. Served with a square of cornbread or a soft roll to sop up the bean liquid, this was Friday before a long weekend food, cheap and filling and universally loved. It faded as sodium guidelines cracked down on processed meat, and the sweet, bubbling pan of franks and beans became one more thing that got replaced by something out of a box. Number 19, corn dogs. Before they came frozen by the case, cafeteria corn dogs were dipped and fried right in the kitchen. The lunch ladies whisked up a cornmeal batter, skewered the frankfurters on wooden sticks, dunked them and dropped them into hot oil until the coating puffed golden and crackling. They came out crisp on the outside, the batter slightly sweet, the frank inside hot and snapping. A tray of them cost the school very little, and kids treated Corn Dog Day like a small holiday. They ate them with yellow mustard squeezed straight down the side, holding the stick like a trophy. It was the rare cafeteria food that was actually fun to eat. The homemade version disappeared almost completely once frozen. Pre-battered corn dogs became cheaper than making them fresh. The ones kids eat now are reheated in a warming oven. The ones from 1966 came straight out of the fryer, and you could taste the difference. Number 18, American goulash. Every region had a name for it. Some called it chop suey, some called it slumgullion, but the cafeteria version was always the same. Elbow macaroni, browned ground beef, canned tomatoes, and diced onion all simmered together into a thick, tangy, filling casserole. The tomato coated every noodle, and the beef gave it just enough substance to hold a kid until the final bell. A single steam pan of it stretched a small amount of meat across an enormous number of children, which is exactly why it appeared on the menu so often. It was cheap, forgiving, and impossible to ruin. The lunch ladies made it by feel, adding a shake of this and a scoop of that. Served with a slice of buttered bread and canned green beans on the side, it was the definition of a Tuesday. Today it survives only in handwritten church cookbooks, replaced entirely by pre-made pasta trays nobody remembers fondly. Number 17, turkey a la king. When the cafeteria wanted to stretch leftover turkey into something that felt fancy, this was the answer. Diced turkey was folded into a thick cream sauce with peas and chopped pimento, then ladled over toast points or a split biscuit until the whole plate went soft and rich. The pimento gave it little flecks of red that made it look like real cooking, not just budget cooking. A can of surplus turkey and a pot of white sauce fed the whole line for almost nothing. It was warm and creamy and gentle, the kind of meal that filled you up without any effort to chew. Kids who turned their noses up at the name ate every bite once they tasted it. This dish, which showed up on hotel menus and in ladies' luncheons across America, made its way into school kitchens as pure thrift. It disappeared when cream sauces made from scratch became too much work for an understaffed kitchen. Number 16. Beef stew. On the coldest weeks of the year, the cafeteria stew pot went on early in the morning and simmered until lunch. Chunks of beef, browned first for depth, then potatoes, carrots, onions, and celery, all cooked slow in a rich brown gravy thickened with a little flour. By the time the doors opened, the whole building smelled like somebody's grandmother had moved into the basement. In tough, cheap cut of beef turned tender over those long hours, and the potatoes broke down just enough to thicken the broth into something that stuck to a spoon. Served with a roll for sopping and a carton of milk, this was a complete, nourishing meal for a few cents a plate. The lunch ladies knew that slow cooking made cheap meat taste expensive, a lesson every home cook once understood. It vanished when kitchens lost the time and the staff to let anything simmer for 4 hours. Now, stew comes reheated, and it shows. First pattern break. Here is where the story gets bigger than the food. The reason any of these meals existed at all traces back to a single moment in American history. During World War II, military doctors examining draftees discovered something alarming. A huge number of young men were being rejected for service because they were malnourished, stunted by years of poor childhood diets during the Great Depression. It was a national embarrassment and a national security crisis at the same time. In 1946, President Truman signed the National School Lunch Act, declaring that feeding American children was a matter of defense. Suddenly, the federal government was buying up agricultural surplus, mountains of cheese, peanut butter, canned meat, flour, and shipping it to school kitchens across the country. The lunch ladies did not choose these ingredients. They were handed whatever the government had too much of that year, and they turned it into meals. Every dish on this list was, in a real sense, invented from surplus. Genius born from what nobody else wanted. Number 15. Salisbury steak with brown gravy. This was the cafeteria's proudest imitation of a steak dinner, and for a lot of kids in the 1960s, it was the fanciest thing they ate all week. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and onion, shaped into oval patties, and baked in sheet pans until browned. Then the lunch ladies smothered the whole tray in a rich brown gravy made from the pan drippings and a little beef base. The gravy soaked into the patties and kept them moist. Served over a scoop of mashed potatoes with a well of gravy in the middle, this was the meal that made a kid feel like he was eating something real, something a grown man would order at a diner. It cost the school a fraction of what an actual steak would. It vanished when the scratch-made version was replaced by a frozen, gray, pre-formed patty that arrived by the case. The name survived. The dinner did not. Number 14. Tuna noodle casserole. The cream of mushroom soup casserole ruled American cafeterias for 2 solid decades, and tuna was its cheapest form. Canned tuna, egg noodles, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a handful of peas all baked together in a giant pan until it bubbled at the edges. Some kitchens crushed potato chips or crackers over the top for the last 15 minutes, so it browned into a salty, crunchy crust. A single steam pan fed dozens of children for pennies each. It was warm and creamy and familiar, the exact same thing their mothers made at home on Wednesday nights. Kids who claimed to hate fish ate it without a second thought because the soup and noodles disguised everything. This was the workhorse casserole of an entire era, the meal that could be assembled from 3 shelf-stable cans and served to a whole school. It disappeared the moment factories learned to freeze pre-made entrees, and nobody bothered to open a can again. Number 13. Chili con carne with crackers. The cafeteria. Chili was not the kind you enter into a competition. It was ground beef, kidney beans, canned tomatoes, chili powder, and onion, simmered in a huge kettle until it thickened into something warm and deeply satisfying. A pot of it stretched a little meat across the whole building, which is exactly why it showed up so often. The lunch ladies served it in plastic bowls with a sleeve of saltine crackers on the side, and every kid had his own ritual, crumbling the crackers in until the chili turned thick as paste, or eating them one by one dipped along the edge. It was the perfect cold weather meal, cheap and hot and filling. In much of the Midwest, Chili Day came paired with something sweet, a combination we will get to at the very top of this list. Cafeteria chili faded as pre-made versions took over, and the kettle that used to simmer all morning went cold for good. Number 12. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The soldiers who came home from Korea and World War II called it something unprintable, but the cafeteria called it creamed dried beef, and it fed millions of kids in the 1960s. Thin slices of salty dried beef were torn into strips and stirred into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, then ladled over white toast until the bread went soft beneath the weight of it. The saltiness of the beef seasoned the whole sauce with no extra effort. It was cheap, fast, and filling, the kind of meal that could be made from shelf-stable ingredients on a morning when the fresh delivery ran late. Veterans who had eaten it on military bases recognized it instantly when their own children described school lunch. The toast soaked up the cream gravy and turned almost custardy underneath. It disappeared entirely as tastes changed and dried beef became a specialty item. Today it exists only in the memories of men who ate it in 2 different institutions. Number 11. Sloppy Joes. In parts of the country they called it a tavern sandwich or a loose meat sandwich, but the cafeteria version was pure Americana. Ground beef browned and simmered in a tangy tomato sauce, sweetened with a little brown sugar and brightened with vinegar and mustard, then spooned onto a soft hamburger bun. The whole point was the mess. The sauce soaked into the bun and ran down your fingers, and every kid ate it, hunched over the tray to catch the drips. A little meat went a long way once it was stretched in sauce, which made it a budget miracle for the kitchen. The lunch ladies made the sauce from scratch in enormous batches, and the smell of simmering tomato and beef drifted through the whole school by mid-morning. It was warm, sweet, savory, and just a little bit thrilling to eat. It faded as pre-made sloppy Joe filling arrived by the can, and the homemade sauce, the thing that actually made it good, was quietly forgotten. Second pattern break. Here is something the cafeteria never got credit for. The single most important item on every 1960s lunch tray was not a dish at all. It was the milk. That little half-pint carton delivered ice-cold from a local dairy cost the school about 3 cents, and it was the reason the whole program existed. The government did not build the National School Lunch Program purely out of kindness. It built it partly to solve a farm crisis. American dairy farmers were producing far more milk than the country could drink, and prices were collapsing. Guaranteeing that every child in America drank a carton at lunch created a massive permanent market that propped up the entire dairy industry. The children got calcium and protein. The farmers got a buyer. Everybody won, and almost nobody noticed the machinery behind it. Kids fought over the chocolate ones, peeled the little cartons open wrong, and left rings of condensation on the table. They had no idea they were the load-bearing wall of American agriculture. Number 10, scalloped potatoes and ham. When the cafeteria needed to use up the ham from a holiday delivery, this was the answer, and it was one of the best meals of the month. Thin slices of potato were layered in deep pans with diced ham, chopped onion, and a rich cream sauce, then baked slow until the top browned and the potatoes went soft, and the whole thing set up into something you could cut with the side of a fork. The ham flavored every layer, and the cream sauce turned the potatoes silky. A little ham stretched across an enormous pan, feeding the whole line for pennies a serving. The lunch ladies pulled the pans from the oven, bubbling and golden, and the smell of ham and cream filled the lunchroom. It was heavy, comforting, and deeply satisfying, exactly the kind of food a kid needed before an afternoon of recess in the cold. It vanished when layered, slow-baked dishes became too labor-intensive for shrinking kitchen staffs. Number 9. Johnny Marzetti. In Ohio and across the Midwest, this casserole was practically the state dish of school cafeterias. Named after a restaurant in Columbus, it was elbow macaroni baked with ground beef, tomato sauce, onions, and a thick layer of melted cheese on top. It was goulash's fancier cousin, richer and cheesier, and it showed up on menus so often that entire generations remember it by name. A single enormous pan stretched a small amount of beef across a whole grade level, and the cheese on top browned into a crust that kids fought over. The lunch ladies made it in batches so large they mixed it in tubs. Served with a roll and a vegetable, it was the comfort meal that made a gray Wednesday bearable. Ask anyone who grew up in Columbus in the 1960s, and they will describe it before you finish the sentence. It disappeared as scratch casseroles gave way to portioned trays, and its name survives mostly as a nostalgic riddle. Number 8. Creamed chicken over biscuits. This was the cafeteria's Sunday dinner impression, served on an ordinary weekday. Chicken, often from surplus cans, was simmered into a thick, peppery cream gravy studded with peas, then ladled generously over a split baking powder biscuit that the kitchen had baked fresh that morning. The biscuits soaked up the gravy from the bottom and turned tender and rich, while the top stayed just crisp enough. It was warm and creamy and filling, the kind of plate that made a kid slow down and actually taste his food. A little chicken and a pot of white sauce fed the whole building for almost nothing. The lunch ladies, who baked those biscuits from scratch every morning, did it before most of the town was awake. This was care disguised as thrift. It disappeared when fresh-baked biscuits became a luxury no understaffed kitchen could afford, and the gravy that once covered them went with it. Number 7. Meatloaf with tomato glaze. Nothing said the cafeteria was cooking a real meal quite like Meatloaf Day. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, onion, and seasoning, pressed into long loaf pans, brushed with a glaze of ketchup and brown sugar, and baked until the tops caramelized and the kitchen smelled like a diner. The breadcrumbs stretched the meat, a trick every thrifty cook once knew, and made the loaf tender instead of dense. Sliced thick and served with a scoop of mashed potatoes and a ladle of gravy, this was the meal that filled a growing kid to the brim. A little beef, some bread, and a few pantry staples fed the whole school for pennies a plate. The tomato glaze gave every slice a sweet, tangy edge that kids remembered for decades. It disappeared when scratch-made loaf gave one to a frozen uniform brick that arrived pre-sliced. The name stayed on the menu. The thing itself was gone. Number 6. Baked macaroni and cheese. Before it came frozen in a solid block, Cafeteria mac and cheese was a scratch-made event. The lunch ladies boiled the elbow macaroni, stirred it into a real cheese sauce built from butter, flour, milk, and mountains of that orange government commodity cheese, then baked the whole thing in deep pans until the top browned and bubbled and formed a crust. That surplus cheese, handed out free by the case, melted into something impossibly rich and glossy. A single pan stretched cheap ingredients into a meal that kids genuinely looked forward to. The corners of the pan, where the cheese browned darkest, were fought over like treasure. It was creamy, salty, and deeply comforting. A scratch dish made possible entirely by a warehouse of surplus dairy nobody knew what to do with. It vanished when frozen. Pre-portioned mac and cheese became cheaper than making it fresh, and the baked crust, the best part, disappeared forever with it. Third pattern break. Here is what nobody talks about. The real magic of the 1960s cafeteria was not any single dish. It was the women who made them. These were skilled cooks, often mothers themselves, who arrived before dawn to bake bread, simmer stock, and cook for hundreds of children with almost no budget and almost no help. They knew how to stretch a little meat across a mountain of noodles, how to turn free surplus cheese into something kids craved, how to make cheap cuts tender with time. They did it every single day, from scratch, and they did it well. Then the world changed. Budget cuts in the early 1980s gutted school food funding. Companies figured out that frozen, pre-made, factory-produced meals were cheaper than paying skilled cooks to make food fresh. One by one, the scratch kitchens closed. The paddles went in the trash. The lunch ladies retired, and nobody replaced their knowledge. We did not just lose the recipes, we lost the people who carried them, and the meals died with them. Number 5. Cornbread. In a cafeteria that served a lot of beans and chili and greens, cornbread was not an afterthought. It was essential. The lunch ladies mixed cornmeal, flour, a little sugar, egg, and buttermilk, poured it into greased sheet pans, and baked it until the tops turned golden and the edges pulled crisp from the pan. It came out warm, faintly sweet, with a tender crumb that crumbled the moment a fork touched it. A pan of cornbread cost the school almost nothing, made from the cheapest possible ingredients, and it turned a bowl of beans into a full meal. Kids crumbled it directly into their chili or dragged it through the pot liquor of a plate of greens. In the South especially, Cornbread Day was a small comfort in an otherwise ordinary week. It disappeared as scratch baking left the cafeteria entirely, replaced by a dense, sweet, cake-like square that came frozen in plastic. The real thing, warm from the pan, is almost impossible to find in a school now. Number 4. Cottage cheese with canned peaches. This was the cafeteria's idea of a light, ladylike lunch, and it appeared on menus far more often than anyone remembers. A scoop of cottage cheese sat in the center of the plate with a canned peach half nestled beside it, sometimes on a leaf of iceberg lettuce for presentation. It cost the kitchen almost nothing, required no cooking at all, and delivered protein from the cheese and a little sweetness from the fruit. For kids, the combination of cool, creamy curds and syrupy soft peaches was strange and oddly satisfying, the sweet and the savory playing off each other in a way nothing else on the tray did. It reflected an era when cottage cheese was considered the height of healthy eating, showing up at every ladies' luncheon and diet plate in America. It faded as tastes shifted and cottage cheese fell out of fashion. Today's students would not recognize it as lunch at all, but in 1965, it was everywhere. Number 3. Butterscotch pudding. Cafeteria dessert in the 1960s was made in the kitchen, not torn from a plastic cup, and butterscotch pudding was the crown jewel. The lunch ladies cooked brown sugar and butter down into a caramel, whisked in milk, egg, and cornstarch, and stirred the whole pot slowly over heat until it thickened into a glossy golden custard. Poured into little dishes and chilled, it set up with a thin skin on top that some kids peeled off and some kids devoured. It was rich, warm-flavored, and deeply nostalgic even to the children eating it. This was the dessert that made an entire generation groan when they heard the name, then spend the rest of their lives trying to find it again. A batch cost pennies to make and turned an ordinary lunch into a small celebration. It vanished when scratch puddings gave way to pre-made single-serve cups, and the version kids eat now, sealed in foil-topped plastic, is a hollow imitation of what came out of that kitchen pot. Number 2. Peanut butter bars. If a kid grew up eating school lunch in the 1960s, one dessert lives in his memory more vividly than any other. A dense, chewy peanut butter cookie base, baked in sheet pans, spread, while still warm, with a thick layer of chocolate frosting that melted slightly into the top and set into a smooth shell. Cut into perfect squares and served on a little napkin, it was the single most beloved thing the cafeteria ever made. The peanut butter came from that same government commodity supply, and the whole bar cost the school almost nothing. But to a child, it was pure gold. Kids traded entire lunches for an extra one. Grown adults, decades later, still search the internet for the exact recipe, convinced no bakery has ever matched it. It disappeared when scratch baking left the cafeteria and desserts became pre-packaged and portion-controlled. The peanut butter bar was not fancy. It was just made with care, and that is exactly why nothing since has ever tasted the same. Number 1. The cinnamon roll served with chili. At the top of this list is not just a food, but a pairing so specific and so beloved that anyone who grew up in the Midwest will gasp the moment they hear it. On Chili Day, the cafeteria served a warm, soft, scratch-baked cinnamon roll right alongside the bowl of chili, and the combination made no logical sense and perfect emotional sense all at once. The lunch ladies proofed the dough before dawn, rolled it with cinnamon and brown sugar, baked it in sheet pans, and drizzled thick white icing over the top while it was still warm. Kids dipped the sweet, gooey roll straight into the savory, spicy chili, and something about the hot and the cold, the sweet and the smoky, turned an ordinary lunch into the best meal of the month. It cost the school almost nothing, just flour, sugar, and the labor of women who cared enough to bake bread for hundreds of children before the sun came up. That is the whole story of this list in a single bite. Real food, made from scratch, from almost nothing, by people whose names most of those kids never even learned. The cinnamon roll and chili survives in a handful of nostalgic districts, but the version that mattered, the one that filled a lunchroom with the smell of fresh bread, is nearly gone. It was never just dessert. It was proof that somebody in that building cared whether you ate well. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The Spanish rice, the butterscotch pudding, the peanut butter bars, the cinnamon roll dipped in chili. Then come back and tell me if your memory was playing tricks on you, or if the lunch ladies really did know something we forgot. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the peanut butter bars get more love than the cinnamon roll and chili, because these were not just school lunches. They were made by people who fed a whole generation from almost nothing and did it with their hands every single morning before the first bell.